I get asked fairly often if a hognose snake can be target trained. And if our hognose snake, Hazel, is a good representative of her species, the answer is yes, of course they can. This is Hazel's enclosure. It's a 24-inch long by 18-inch high by 16-inch wide showcase enclosure. And I'm unlocking it, and I'm going to slide the door open and ask her to shift out onto the scale station via a target. And she already saw me getting everything ready. She recognized those historical antecedents, and she was at the door waiting to come on out. So I present the target as a signal for her to shift on out of her enclosure and onto the scale. And this is usually the slowest part of the session because she has to be quite careful shifting out of her enclosure and down onto the scale station. I go ahead at this point because she's got half of her body out and she has her head over the scale station, and I pair the target with a small piece of cod. So for this session, I'm using fish. I'm using frozen thawed cod that I just cut up into small pieces to use as reinforcers. I go ahead and I give her the cod once most of her body's on the scale. This is repetition 2 during the same session, and you see how much more quickly she responds here. So she's really building behavioral momentum. And once she takes the cod, I hold the target there for a while to help her eat it. These small pieces of cut up fish fall apart really easily. Remember that they're not cooked, and so they do become quite frangible. And as she's trying to chew it and swallow it, it's kind of falling apart. So I'm holding the target there more than I normally would, or longer than I normally would during a target training session, just to give her something to push against to help her get that fish into her mouth. This is repetition 3 during the same session, and I want to use this repetition to proof her behavior. I want to definitely make sure that she is recognizing the target and following it. And so I'm asking her to change direction 180 degrees, and she does. She does a great job. She completely turns around and goes the opposite direction from the way that she was headed when we started this repetition. She climbs back onto the scale, just does a great job following the target, and she, of course, gets reinforced for that. This is repetition 4 during the same session. She's hanging out in the scale, and I just ask her again to follow the target in a random direction. She seems to have really built up a lot of enthusiasm for this training session. She seems really into it. And because I'm using small pieces of fish, it doesn't hurt to do more than one repetition. So this is repetition 5. I have all sorts of little tiny pieces of cod left, and so I figured I'd go ahead and see if she would maintain her enthusiasm and momentum during the session, and she certainly does. Although as the pieces of cod get smaller, I have to help her a little bit more keep those in her mouth. Finally, what I do is these are just bits of cod that are left over, and I set this down for her to sort of forage in and give her a little bit of added enrichment. But she had headed off in the opposite direction, so I'm using the target to direct her back to where I have this little exercise set up for her. And I moved the target over the dish where I have the random pieces of cod, and she keeps following the target, and I really wanted her to notice the cod, so I helped her out a little bit there. And she really actually had difficulty eating these very small bits of cod from the dish, and I ended up feeding her several with the tongs. They just fall apart easy. They're sort of wet and frangible, and they're not cooked. And so hognose snakes push against their food pretty hard, and they chew it to the back of their mouth where they can swallow it. And when she does that with the pieces of fish, they tend to break up and fall apart.